Hey guys, I just wanted to give you a quick video to review one of the ways, and again, there are multiple ways, but one of the strategies that you can use to calculate tips. So just the basics, and hopefully you've read this at the top, but tipping people who provide you service is a critical part of our culture. It's also known as gratuity. So if you're out at a restaurant or you have a delivery service, gratuity might be the word that you see, and it also is just a fancy word for tips. Workers depend on good tips in order to make a living. If you've been in any of my practical math classes, we've discussed some of the service industry jobs and how they sometimes have a lower base income. And again, they rely on tips. This is a motivational tactic for employers because, again, service is the name of the game. And if you are in the service industry, they want to make sure that you do a nice job. And you're motivated to do a good job if you are a service worker because the better job you do, the higher tips you make. So again, depending on what kind of place you're going to and what kind of service you're receiving, the amount of tip you do leave varies. Um, the most standard tipping rates are often 15 and 20%, mostly looking at the restaurant industry. So I did provide a math hacks video for you to watch that reviews how you quickly compute what tip amount you should leave when you go out if you're looking at that 15 to 20% base range. Now, again, this is just one method you can use. There's multiple ways you could do it, but this is just a kind of a simple trick to calculating tips. So let's go over this kind of example here at the bottom. And again, this is provided in the goal task for you. So in addition to this video, watch the math hacks video again, but I'll explain it to you so that you can kind of get a feel what I'm talking about. All right, so if this is your bill at Dos Amigos restaurant, let's say you're in New York, here is what you order. Here is your subtotal, which is basically the addition of all of the items, straightforward, add them up, and you get $29.47. There is sales tax involved, and it's calculated for you there. It's $2.50. So when you add your base price plus your tax, you get a total of $31.97. So if you were going to calculate 15% tip, here's kind of what they're talking about. This $3.20, you might ask yourself, where did they get that? I don't see $3.20 anywhere on that receipt. Well, here's kind of a basic, and you should see this in the math hacks video, but to kind of explain it to you a little bit further, that number is based on your total, $31.97. What they did, guys, is they rounded that up. $31.97, if I'm looking at a dollar amount and I'm rounding that value up, is $32. Now, the easiest kind of mental math that you can do is 10%. Okay, 10% of any number, and you should have learned this more so in elementary school, but if you haven't, or you've forgotten, or you just completely missed the bucket on it, 10% of any number, you can move that decimal one spot to the left, and we get 3.200. Now, we've talked about in money world, and no matter what course you've taken, we've probably applied something to money, that we only have two spots after the decimal for money values, right? So 320, that's how we got it. We calculated 10%. So you take the total, you round it up to the nearest dollar, you move that decimal over, and we get $3.20. Now, if we take a look at 10%, okay, the number 10, and again, it actually kind of spells it out for you down here a little bit more. You see the 10% down there. But that being said, if we look at the numbers 15%, 15% is 5% more, right? So the 320 is 10%, and 5% more would give you a total of 15%. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this amount, we're going to take 10% and divide it by 2 and get $1.60. That is our technically 5%. Okay, so we took 10%, we divided it in half because 10 divided by 2 is 5% or 5. So that's where you get the $1.60 at. And we noticed that when we moved the decimal over, we got 320, because again, 5% and 10%, when we put them together, gives us 15%. So when we're calculating 15%, we in a sense move the decimal over, cut it in half to 5, that 5%, and then add it on to our 10%, which is that easy slide of the decimal, the 320. And that's how you get the 480. And again, it comes with practice, guys. If that was a little bit confusing to you, watch the math hack video a couple times. Take a minute, look at the video. I'll review it one more time with you. Hopefully it makes a little bit more sense the second time around. So again, 15% is kind of a breakdown of 10% plus 5%. That's how we get 15%. Just thinking about numbers, 10 and 5 makes 15%. Or no percent. In order to find 10% of our bill, we again took this value, $31.97. We don't like decimals, so we're just going to round it up to $32. To find 10%, we slide that decimal over and we get $3.20. Now that is our 10%, right? We still need to add to it our 5% in order to get the 15%, right? How do you figure out 5% of 10%? Well, we divide it in half. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So we take that 320 and we divide it by 2 and we get $1.60. So again, and I'm just kind of writing it on the side to see if it makes any more sense to you. Hopefully it does. But you would just then add those two amounts together. The 320 is my 10%, $1.60 is another 5%. So if I add that up, I get 15%, which is equivalent to $4.80 according to my bill. The second one here is calculating 20%. So 20% is usually a little bit more straightforward and something that students do typically better with. If you think about how I get to 20, 10 and 10, right? So once you figure out what 10% is, we just double it. And that's what that calculation here in that box is. We again got $3.20 because we looked at our bill of $31.97. We rounded it up because we don't like decimals. Because again, it's a little bit open-ended as far as it doesn't have to be an exact amount. There's no right or wrong answer for tip. As long as it's in the ballpark, it's acceptable. But we can round to make our lives a little easier. So we're going to take $32. 10%, I slide that decimal over and I get $3.20. That's technically 10%, right, guys? If I'm looking for 20%, I would basically be adding up two of those. So the shortcut, again, if you are having repeated addition, is to multiply by 2. So this is where they get the multiply by 2. And you get $6.40. So again, the 20% is a lot more straightforward. You slide the decimal over and you multiply by 2. The top one there, that 15%, a little bit more to it. We divide by 2 first, and then we add it to the original amount. So when you go to complete your practice activity, see if I can move down here on my screen. Those steps are outlined there for you. So steps to calculate 15% tip. Move the decimal one spot to the left. First, actually, I'm so sorry. I should have put in there round your answer or round your bill to the nearest dollar. Then 2, move the decimal one spot to the left. So 55.18, I would round it to $55. Move that spot over. Move the decimal over to $5.51, or I'm sorry, $5.50 because we'd round this to $55. Divide by 2 and add to your answer from step 2. And then steps to calculate 20% tip. Again, my apologies. I should have put round the bill to the nearest dollar. And then for 20%, again, you round the bill to the nearest dollar, move the decimal spot 1 to the left. That's in a sense calculating 10%, and you're going to multiply your answer by 2. So that's what you're expected to do for this first section here. There are some actual tips in here. It says when leaving a cash tip, again, you may not want to leave exact change. You can round up to the nearest half dollar. And if you're using an electronic payment, you will need to calculate your total bill with the tip amount. So this is what I'm asking you to do down here, calculating your total bill. So not only do you have to find your tip, but then you also add it to your bill. So again, here's that bill from earlier. We had the $31.97. We calculated it up above. 15% gave us $4.80. Now we stopped at $4.80 up here, right, and called it a day. When you're looking to, again, pay my entire bill, I have to pay the amount of what I bought plus the tax, and I get a subtotal. I calculate my tip, and I'm adding on my tip because it's an extra expense. So once you find your 15% tip of $4.80, then I add it on to my bill. So these numbers shouldn't be the same. It should show a progression of your bill. So again, total of your, and again, this part's standard, it's going to be there for you. The total of your amount, the tax, the total before your tip, So if you were not a good citizen, you could just walk away paying $31.97. But again, as your duty as a citizen, acknowledging people's livings and wages, you should, again, leave a tip for people because that is critical to their income and their survival. So we calculate that 15% tip. That's an added expense for you as the customer. So we add it on to the total bill. So I got $36.77 because I added $31.97 and I added together the $44.80 and ended up with a total of $36.77. Same kind of a deal over here. If I had that same bill from above and I had all my items total up to $29.47, I had $250 in tax, a total with tax, $31.97. When we calculated our 20% tip, if you remember, guys, we rounded it to 32, we multiplied by 2 and got a tip of $6.40. This is your tip. You add those two amounts together, meaning your total plus your tip, because this is an added expense, something else you have to think about, to get your total bill, what you would actually walk out paying of $38.37. So when you look at the examples down below, that's your task, is to calculate, here's your total bill, find your 15%. So again, round your number. This would be $25 even. Move your decimal over, divide by 2, add it to that answer. That is your tip. Add it on to your total for your actual total bill. And then same for the rest of them. You have a 20%, 20%, 15, and 15%. So good luck. Reach out if it, is still confusing to you or you need a little bit more guidance with that. I'd be more than happy to help. But hopefully this instructional video, along with that math hacks video at the top, is helpful in helping you determine how you can appropriately tip when you go out to eat.